Coming up on today's edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast, it is Thursday. What does that mean? Crossover Thursday, baby. That's right, the very first crossover edition of the 2023 season. The Denver Broncos are up first, so that and a whole lot more will come up on today's edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast for September 7th, 2023.
Just win. Just win. Just win. Just win.
The autumn wind is a raider, pillaging just for fun. He'll knock you round and upside down and laugh when he's conquered and won. And won. And won. And won. And won.
And welcome in, Raider Nation, to another edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast. Thank you so much for making the show your first listen of the day. Make sure you subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast to get the latest edition of the show as soon as it becomes available. Of course, as always, if you're checking us out on YouTube, thank you. Doing a fantastic job really helping blow up the page. Man, it hasn't been a YouTube page for a really long time, and it's already got a ton of subscribers, and we definitely appreciate that. And, of course, it wouldn't be the YouTube page without my man Ari. He does a great job each and every day, and I know some people are probably thinking like, yeah, whatever, Q, you'd shout him out each and every day. There's a reason why I shout out Ari every day because, man, this dude takes so much pride in the YouTube page. You would be shocked on how much pride and how personally he takes the page. He comes to me sometimes at the radio station, like, man, I really want to do this. I'm like, dude, you're overthinking it. But that's the pride in his work that he really has, and I can appreciate that. I'm the same way. And he'll tell you how many times I'll do the podcast. The whole thing will be done, and I'll start over. I'll say, yeah, I wasn't feeling that one. I didn't like that one. I forgot to say this or this, that, and the other, and I'll just start over. So when I tell him that he's tripping, he's probably looking at me like, yeah, dog, you're tripping. But, again, having pride in your work goes a long way in this business and just in general. Tells you a lot about yourself. So we definitely appreciate Ari. Hit him up on Twitter, at Ari Produces. You can always hit me up on Twitter as well, at your boy Q254. And the Locked On Raider podcast voicemail line is 707-654-4693. We won't have any calls or texts coming up on today's show because it's the crossover edition, so it's all three segments. It was a time where I would only do like one segment that had to do with the crossover edition, sometimes two. Now it's across the network. It's standard that we do all three. So that's what we're going to do. Sarah Bettinger from Locked On Broncos, him and Cody Rourke do a show together. Cody wasn't available. So because I'm in Bristol and I'm doing these two radio shows, not only Raider Nation Radio 920, but also ESPN Game Night, I wasn't available to do it Wednesday night or Thursday morning, whatever the case may be. So I had to do it about Wednesday afternoon. So me and Sarah, we got together while still in the hotel room, and I was able to knock out the crossover edition and then following my radio show on ESPN, and able to knock this out as well before I went back to the hotel. So it's Thursday right now. It was Wednesday when we did the crossover edition, but I want to hit you with a few news and notes of the day before we do jump into part one of the crossover edition. So let's go ahead and do that. The Raiders and Broncos released their injury report on Wednesday. The Raiders had 3 guys. The Broncos had 4. The Raiders had DeAndre Carter, Brandon Faison, and Chandler Jones listed. Carter has a knee injury, was limited. Brandon Faison, a shin injury, did not participate. And Chandler Jones, who we'll talk about later in this segment, with a personal day, non-injury related, did not participate. As far as the Broncos go, tight end Greg Dulcich, he also had a personal day, non-injury related, did not participate on Wednesday. Wide receiver Jerry Jeudy, hamstring injury, he was limited, so that'd be a big get if Jerry Jeudy could return for this game on Sunday. He was expected to be out, but having him out there practicing is a big thing for the Denver Broncos. Tight end Chris Manhertz, dealing with a chest injury, was limited, and then cornerback Riley Moss with the abdomen injury was limited as well. We'll find out another injury report later on today, another one on Friday, then 90 minutes out of kickoff. We'll get the who's in and who's out, actives and inactives for the game on Sunday. I mentioned Chandler Jones. This situation is ongoing. I thought it was going to start to die down now that, all the social media had hit and Josh McDaniels talked to the media on Wednesday. So I thought, okay, everything's starting to calm down. It's going to start to get back to normal. And then all of a sudden, while I was doing my radio show on ESPN, everything got ramped back up and really took off quick, fast, in a hurry. More social media posts came from Chandler Jones, and I'll tell you right now, and I'm trying to look at my phone right now to take a look at it. It wasn't pretty. First of all, he put out a picture of the ladies' badge. Heather Thanapin, I think, CRT team, Fire and Rescue, City of Las Vegas is the badge, and literally put that out there on the Instagram page. Then continues to go on with his story and said the Raiders sent. What does it say? Hold on, because it's going too fast. Here we go. Try to do this in real time. The Raiders sent her to my place, said, you need to come with us. You're in danger. So that was the second one. Now, he puts a little bit of a message in it where he actually has a couple things to say here. So here's Chandler Jones on his Instagram message.
You tried to spook me? Man, TMZ hit my phone, man. Your boy got pictures, text messages. McDaniel Ziegler.
So that didn't sound very good right there from Chandler Jones. Really didn't. I don't know what he's going through, and I just hope, as I mentioned on Tuesday's show, on Wednesday's show, that I really hope that this guy's okay. And if he's not okay, I hope that someone could help him be okay. Just even that couple seconds right there, what he had to say did not sound good at all. Then he goes on to say, they had me outside in my drawers, LOL, naked. That lady was rude. Then I got to showing her some of the text, and then she switched up. Buddy from the Raiders tried to give me the look like, don't say anything. And then it goes on to say, is that it? I think that might have been the last part of the slideshow. Yeah, so that was that. So, again, this Chandler Jones situation is not getting any better anytime soon. It's inevitable that the Raiders and him are going to split. I don't know how it's going to come down. I don't know who's in the right and who's in the wrong. That's not my place to judge right now. I'm sure we'll find out details sooner rather than later. I just hope that Chandler Jones is okay, and I hope everybody involved in this situation is okay. Finally, got this little nugget that I thought that you'd like to hear about Davante Adams, and this has to do with the game coming up on Sunday. Raiders wide receiver Davante Adams led the NFL with 14 TDs in 2022, his first season with the Raiders. He became the fourth player ever with 10 touchdown receptions and at least 6 of his first 9 career seasons. Adams entered the 2023 season with 87 career touchdown catches. With the touchdown catch at Denver on Sunday at 1:25 Pacific time on CBS, Adams will surpass Larry Fitzgerald for the 5th most touchdown receptions by a player in his first 10 NFL seasons in NFL history. Only Pro Football Hall of Famers Jerry Rice with 131, Randy Moss with 124, Marvin Harrison with 110, and Terrell Owens with 101 have more. So there you go, a little nugget there for Davante Adams for Sunday's game against the Denver Broncos. So that's all I got for you for about news and notes of the day. Now it's time to jump right into the crossover edition. Sarah Bettinger and myself talking all things Raiders and Broncos. And we start out talking biggest storylines in the upcoming game. Check it out.
Welcome to Crossover Thursday. I'm Sarah Bettinger, co-host of Locked On Broncos, here with the legend, your boy Q, host of Locked On Raiders. This Crossover Thursday episode is brought to you by PrizePicks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use code LockedOnNFL for a deposit match up to $100. And thanks so much to everyone for taking time to listen or watch Locked On Raiders, Locked On Broncos right here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And hey, do us a favor, subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast so that you can get every episode as soon as it's made available. Q, it's finally week 1. I feel like we've been talking through a 10-year long offseason or something like that, waiting for this game. Broncos versus Raiders here in Denver this coming weekend. And it should be exciting. I mean, these two teams that are taking on a lot of change this offseason, right? Obviously, the Broncos changing head coach, Raiders changing quarterbacks, and a lot of other change within these organizations. But as you look at this matchup ahead of week 1, what would you say from the Raiders side of things is the biggest story going into week 1?
Well, you said it, all the change that the Raiders have overcome, not overcome, but have taken on this offseason and training camp and preseason, from the quarterback to the new additions, by way of free agency, like a Jacoby Myers was brought in, guys on the defensive side of things like Marcus Peters, right? I mean, there's so many different things. And it's funny that, when everyone asked me, Q, what do you think that the Raiders are going to do this year? For the longest, I kept saying, I just don't know, right? There's so many questions because there is so much new. And then Josh McDaniels in year 2 of the head coach, he's got a lot to prove that he could be a head coach in the NFL. I mean, he hasn't done it successfully yet, as far as a winning record. So there's so much questions, but I'll tell you that, kind of watching training camp and preseason and seeing how this team has started to evolve, I'm starting to see like the vision. I'm starting to understand what they're going for. Now, does that mean it's going to execute and turn into wins and losses, or turn into more wins than losses this upcoming season? I mean, obviously that's up to the players to determine that. But I'm starting to feel pretty good about this team and the direction they're going, led by Jimmy Garoppolo, who I had a lot of questions about when the Raiders decided to sign him. So really, I think that's just the storyline for this new game or this new season it's a new season, a new look Raiders, and what can Josh McDaniels do going into year 2?
Right. And I think that's going to be fascinating to see because, like you said, the jury's kind of still out on him as an NFL head coach, right? I mean, we obviously remember him very well in Denver for his time there. And we've talked about that before. And I think now that he's got a year under his belt in Las Vegas, like you said, you're kind of seeing that vision unfold. And that's been a big buzzword in Denver as well. But as he and Dave Ziegler reshape the roster, what did you notice out there at training camp as maybe being those biggest indicators, so to speak, of that vision kind of coming into fruition a little bit? Was it the way they've been drafting? Was it the free agents they're bringing in, changing culture? What would you say is that biggest change you're seeing as the vision is unfolding?
I honestly saw a big emphasis on the defensive side of things, right? And that's something that the Raiders have not had for a very long time. So they have had to have a better defense. They've always had Max Crosby, and then they've had everybody else, right? Chandler Jones was, a disappointment in year 1, and there really wasn't anyone else. The secondary was always questionable. The linebackers were always questionable. The safeties, there's too many times that they allowed teams to come back and win games. And so all offseason long, Coach McDaniels and Patrick Graham and company continue to have an emphasis on creating turnovers, getting your hands on the ball, getting your hand on the quarterback. And if you go and see what they did in free agency, they didn't bring any sexy names in. They didn't even bring anybody in that wows the NFL world. Like, man, that Marcus Epps was a great signing. That Robert Spillane was a great signing. I mean, you just don't do that with those guys. But I see where they fit in this team. Marcus Peters was probably the biggest name that they brought in, and we realize that he's on the back end of his career. So it's not like it's prime Marcus Peters. So, it's one of those things. But with the guys that they drafted, no big names outside of Tyree Wilson. They were all just guys that kind of fit with what they want to do, get to the quarterback and get their hands on the ball. And so for me, I look at the offense and think the offense is going to be fine, right? Jimmy G stays healthy. There's enough weapons that they're going to be fine. I think Bronco fans know plenty about, the weapons that the Raiders have regardless, but it's all on the defensive side. I think that this this season really rides on what they do defensively and if they can complement the offense. So I like what they're doing. They're getting their hands on a lot of balls and they're making an emphasis to get to the quarterback. And that can only be a good thing for this team. So if they can execute that, I think some good things could happen.
Right. And it certainly doesn't inspire much confidence to hear you say that on the Broncos side of things, because one of the biggest storylines, and we'll get to Sean Payton, but what you just said leads me right into really Russell Wilson needing to have a bounce back season being probably the biggest story, other than I know Sean Payton has drawn a lot more of the attention to himself to, I think, deliberately try to take it off of Russell Wilson. I'm curious to know your thoughts on this, but I also want to just say, Russell, he, like you said, at training camp, it sounds like he's looked a lot better. We saw in the preseason, I think Russ looked a lot more confident, looked a lot more like himself. He's obviously, a lot of people are talking about the fact that he's dropped weight. He looks quicker again. Russell, him coming back and having a bounce back year is absolutely critical. If that doesn't happen, the Broncos and the fan base, it's going to be mayhem in Denver once again, because they just can't have him go out there, especially with the amount of money they spent, and not perform at a high level. And so I think Russell is really the biggest storyline for Denver this year in terms of on the field. What are we looking for? Everybody wants to see, it seems like in the media realm, a lot of people seem to want to see Russell Wilson fail. And I think that's kind of been a fascinating storyline. But I guess kind of what was your perspective from the Raiders side of things last year on what seemed to be the decline of Russell Wilson? And what are you kind of feeling as you've been monitoring the Broncos from a distance this offseason for Russell Wilson maybe making a comeback here in 2023?
Well, I think Sean Payton's going to be good for him. I really do. I think that was a great hire by Denver to be able to get him. I thought that the Chargers were going to go get him after their loss in the playoffs. I thought that was a done deal. Obviously, it didn't happen. So Sean Payton being hired by Denver, I think, is a really good move. And I think that he's going to help. If there's a way to save Russell Wilson, he'll be able to find a way to get it done. And, my biggest thing is I was shocked and surprised that Russell Wilson looked like that last year, right? I just realized that, obviously there's a reason why Seattle was comfortable with trading him. And honestly, when they made that move, I thought, wow, okay, they've got a guy who's a Super Bowl winning quarterback. He's coming to town. That's going to be a hell of a player. I've always been a fan of Russell Wilson. And then just to see the way that he played last year was a big shock. And so really my big question when it comes to Denver right now, and I know that you'll have a way better answer than I would, is what has Sean Payton done since he's taken over to, really work on getting Russell Wilson back to where he needs to be? And how quickly can Sean Payton turn this team around? I think that the team's going to be good under Sean Payton. I think he's going to get there. I do question how quickly it can happen because I just know that turnover in the NFL is not an easy process. But as far as you're concerned, what have you seen him do with Russell Wilson so far, and how quickly can he get this thing turned around?
Yeah, I think he inspires a lot of confidence, that's for sure. I mean, you look at his resume, and I think that's what a lot of Broncos fans are clinging to at this point is the fact that he had how many offenses in New Orleans, and only a couple of them were outside the top 10, and,
Yeah.
averaging 11 wins per 17 games, and the things that he did with Drew Brees. And then, you even look at the work that he did with guys like Teddy Bridgewater and Jameis Winston, and even Taysom Hill to a lesser degree, or maybe even to a greater degree, I guess, depending on how you look at that. But just his work with quarterbacks, like you said, you kind of feel that confidence that he's going to be able to get Russell Wilson back on track. And that's just the confidence that Sean Payton exudes, right? He's very much like his mentor, Bill Parcells, in the way that he just kind of, he seems to be able to speak things into existence. He talks a lot, like you said earlier, that vision, and you see it unfolding. He talks a lot about that vision, and I wouldn't even say he's just a perfectionist. He demands perfection, right? He's one of those types of people that he notices every flaw, and he stays up late into the night to work on those flaws. And so with Russell specifically, I think he's trying to just get him to be more himself. Like there was the big ESPN piece that came out where it was talking about, he told Russell Wilson, stop acting like you're, kissing babies all the time. Like basically you're not running for public office. And I think Russell just needs to kind of get back to that football side of things. I think he felt that pressure to come in and be the next Peyton Manning in Denver, right? And have that immediate MVP caliber success. But it became too theatrical off the field for everybody. And everybody was kind of part of this circus going on in Denver. So I think Sean Payton doing his best to kind of get everybody wrangled back in and say, hey, this is all about football. And Russell, you're part of the team, So I think that's where he's making the biggest difference. And I think it's going to yield great results. But like you said, turnover in the NFL, it takes time. And we saw that with Peyton Manning. The Broncos almost started 2-5 with Peyton Manning as the starting quarterback. So turnover does take time in the NFL. And it's going to be a fun week one matchup, I think, to see, with Raiders having a new quarterback. Broncos have a new head coach and coaching staff. So we'll see how this all unfolds. And we are going to talk about some of the best matchups here in this game. Week one, Denver Broncos versus Las Vegas Raiders. Kind of a one-sided rivalry over the last 4 years. We're going to talk about why that is and what might change here coming up. But I want to tell you about our sponsor today, PrizePicks. Today's Crossover Thursday is brought to you by PrizePicks. Testing your skills on PrizePicks this football season is the most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. And if you have the skills, you could turn $10 into $250 with just a few taps. And PrizePicks even offers Apple Pay for quick and easy deposits into your account this football season. If you want to take Josh Jacobs to go for over 60 yards rushing and a touchdown, or maybe Russell Wilson to throw for more than 2 touchdowns, you can put your daily fantasy skills to the test. Just go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use the code LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. That's prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL. Code LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match up to $100.
So there was part one of the crossover edition. Sarah Bettinger from Locked On Broncos and myself talking all things, kind of setting the tone for the game coming up on Sunday. Coming up in segment number 2, we continue our conversation on the crossover edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast. All right, Raider Nation, here we go. Segment number 2 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Time to jump into part 2 of the crossover edition. Sarah Bettinger, host of Locked On Broncos, and myself talking all things week 1 matchup. 1:25 is the kickoff, Pacific time, 4:25 Eastern on CBS, Raiders and Broncos. Here's part 2 of that conversation.
Let's talk about some matchups now that could decide Raiders versus Broncos. Q, I'm going to kick it over to you. What is maybe one of the most important matchups as you look at the Raiders offensively going up against the Broncos defensively? Is there something that you got your eye on? You circled this matchup here going into week 1.
Yeah, and it's something that I've circled for a while now, and there's been a lot of success, and it's with number 8, not number 28, but number 8. That's Josh Jacobs. He's back. He obviously worked out his contract situation with the Silver and Black, and that was very important, not only for the Raiders season, but for this game, right? As you know, Josh Jacobs has had a ton of success against the Denver Broncos, and so I know that this is a game he gets up for. I've asked him in the locker room multiple times, like, what is it about the Broncos? And, he's talked about the colors of the jersey, the fact that it's a rivalry game, a division game. He's just wired like that too. He wants to be that alpha dog. And really, I mean, he's the guy that was the identity for the Raiders a season ago when they didn't have an identity. At some point, he stepped up and was like, hey, here I am. I'm the identity right here. Give me the rock. Feed me. He went on to lead the league in rushing. Not saying he's going to do that again in 2023, but I know that he's going to be up for this game. And now the only question when it comes to Josh Jacobs is he did miss all of training camp. He didn't have any kind of preseason activity whatsoever. So is his body going to be in football shape? Not shape. I know he's in shape. He's always going to be in shape. But will he be in football shape? How will the elevation, how will that affect him early on? Is he going to have to catch his breath and then give the rock to Zamir White a little bit? Probably. But how many carries is he going to be able to have? So I'm really looking at the most important, I think, matchup for the Raiders offensively against the Broncos defense is how much of the workload can number 8 carry? How much can Josh Jacobs really go to work against that Denver Broncos defense? And I know that when Sean Payton was asked about Josh Jacobs earlier in the week, he kind of downplayed it like, hey, he's one of the good players. We're obviously going to focus in on trying to slow him down, but, we're not going to have any specific plan for him. But I think everyone knows, Bronco fans and everyone knows how effective Josh Jacobs has been. So as far as I'm concerned, it's what kind of workload can he carry against that Broncos defense? So when you're looking at the Broncos side of things in the offense, as they go up against this Raiders defense, what are you looking for?
Well, the offensive line was invested in heavily this offseason. Obviously, they brought in Mike McGlinchey to play right tackle, and we'll see. Can he be the one to finally shut down Max Crosby? I doubt it, but we'll have to wait and see. I'm sure that I know there's clips floating around out there, Q. I've seen them, the Mike McGlinchey versus Max Crosby when McGlinchey played for the 49ers. So I think the Broncos are going to have to establish the run early to make sure that they neutralize guys like Crosby and obviously Tyree Wilson coming in. And I guess don't know quite the situation with Chandler Jones going on right now. I'm sure you're talking about that as we go along here today, but really, it doesn't matter. Any pass rusher has been able to get the better of the Broncos right tackles over the last 6-7 years. It doesn't seem to matter who is out there. So McGlinchey playing right tackle now, one of the highest paid offensive linemen in the NFL. The Broncos will be expecting big things out of him, as well as Ben Powers there at left guard. I feel like a lot of attention, Q, gets paid to offensive tackles get a lot of blame for sack numbers, I feel like, across the NFL. But really, the Broncos' interior offensive line was their weakest area last year. They gave up 63 sacks in total. And I remember Russell Wilson constantly having to duck and get away from guys that were coming right at his face, not guys that were coming necessarily off the edge all the time. But I think it's just this offensive line in general being able to contain, like you said, that improved Raiders pass rush. That's why I think a lot of Broncos fans listening to this are going to hear that and say, well, great. I mean, that's exactly what we need going into the year, is a team that looks better in the pass rush department that's already given us fits. So I think that's going to be one of those matchups to watch for sure as we shift things over, I guess, to the other side, your perspective there when the Raiders are on defense. What's that matchup or maybe key player that you're looking out for?
Well, really, I just want to see what that Raiders defensive line is going to do. Are they going to be able to generate that rush? And, you talked about the interior part of the offensive line giving up so many sacks and really being the problem of the Broncos offensive line. Well, the Raiders have struggled to get that interior pressure. So can they have somebody that is a complement to Max Crosby, right? Does Tyree Wilson, the rookie who only played 14 snaps in the preseason, is he a guy that steps up and has a big impact? Like you mentioned, Chandler Jones, who knows what's going on with him? But my focus is on the interior. Can they get some push from the middle? If they can get some push from the middle, that makes the linebackers' job that much easier. That makes the corners that much easier. That makes the safeties that much easier. And I think that the corners are improved. I think with Nate Hobbs going to the slot, that's going to help. Marcus Peters, he's the wily veteran. He's the guy that if the ball heads his way, he could take it the other way, right? I mean, he's made a living out of creating turnovers. And Jacorian Bennett's the rookie, so he's going to be a guy that Russell Wilson's probably going to try to target early and often and see what he's looking like. So I'm sure Bronco fans will see number 0 out there and be like, what the hell is number 0 out there on the corner? That's the rookie Jacorian Bennett, the 4th round guy out of Maryland. So, you got to pay attention to him to see what he's going to do. And it's going to be, thrown into the fire immediately. So I'm sure that Russell Wilson, that big 0 will be a big target on his back, and he'll try to go after him and test the rookie early. Can he hold his own? Right. And so just what is this new revamped Raiders defense? Has been such an emphasis on being much better, playing discipline, creating turnovers, this, that, and the other, every coaching line that you can imagine. And look, honestly, I saw it in training camp with my own eyes. Now that's training camp though, and it's preseason. Can it translate into the regular season? So really, I just have a focus on the whole defense in general to see if what we saw in training camp and preseason can translate into the regular season, starting with Denver.
Right, and I think it's crazy. I mean, on the other side of things, we haven't even yet brought up Devontae Adams versus Pat Surtain II, right? I mean, that's going to be. I was telling Cody the other day, it's going to be one of those matchups that all of the guys who love to break down all 22 on Twitter, we're going to see clips floating around all week because those guys are 2 technicians at their position. I think you can kind of circle that matchup as being it's going to be critical to the game because it's gonna matter who. Okay, if Pat Surtain is winning that matchup, then who's getting the ball? Or if Devontae is getting, the better of Pat Surtain, what are the Broncos doing to adjust to that? That's going to have a huge impact on this game. And those 2 guys, they always will have a huge impact on games. So I can't wait to see that. And I love what you brought up, the NFL allowing players to wear 0. I know Broncos fans are excited to see Jonathan Cooper make his debut as potentially a starter. Sean Payton's pretty coy about the starting lineup, but I think we have a good idea. Jonathan Cooper, who will be wearing 0 for the Broncos, he'll be trying to get after Jimmy Garoppolo, and he's been on the team since 2021, but seems like he's really stepping into his own and could potentially be in line for a breakout season there. So it's going to be an exciting matchup, Q. I'm excited for it, and I can't wait to see, can the Broncos end this losing streak against the Raiders? Are the Raiders going to keep it? Is Josh Jacobs going to keep on dominating the Denver Broncos? We need to talk about this. What's got to go right for each of these teams to win here in week 1? Before we talk about that, though, I want to tell you about LinkedIn. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. You want to be 100% certain that you have access to the best qualified candidates available, and that's why you got to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the right people for your team faster and for free. So if you want to find the best and most qualified candidates, it's never been easier to create a free job post on LinkedIn Jobs. Just add your job and the purple hashtag hiring frame to your LinkedIn profile to spread the word that you're hiring. Simple tools like screening questions, they make it easy to focus on candidates with just the right skills and experience so that you can quickly prioritize who you would like to interview and hire. It's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to and faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job. Terms and conditions apply.
There was part 2 of the conversation right there. Sarah Bettinger from Locked On Broncos and myself talking all things Raiders and Broncos. Closing things out in segment number 3, we're going to get into the key matchups, what I'll be looking for in the game, what he'll be looking for in the game, and I'll even let it be known who I believe is going to win the game. We'll do it in segment number 3 as we close things out on today's edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast. Here we go, Raider Nation, segment number 3 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Time to jump into part 3 of the conversation. Sarah Bettinger and myself, Locked On Broncos, Locked On Raiders, talking about week 1's matchup in Denver. I'll even let you know who I think is going to win it. We'll talk about it here. Check it out. Segment number 3. Here's part 3 of that conversation.
What must go right for the Raiders or the Broncos to win this weekend? It's going to be a fascinating matchup between 2 teams that have, like we said, taken on a lot of change over the last couple years, implementing their vision, implementing their style. Josh McDaniels on the Raiders side, Sean Payton now with the Denver Broncos. I know, Q, that Broncos country is, their expectations have been super high the last handful of years, and this year very much so tempered, way down. I think everybody's kind of entered this cynical mode almost, although everybody's still very much excited for the team to be back. I'm curious to know from your side of things, we've talked about matchups, we talked about key players, but what has to really go right from the Raiders' perspective in order to go into Denver week 1 and get this victory?
It's going to be interesting. The starters played in the preseason a drive, right? And so they didn't play at all last year. And of course, there was a lot of different players on the team. They didn't play at all last year. And so it kind of looked like they got off to a slow start. Well, they played one drive. So is that going to make a big difference as far as, being able to be on the same page? Probably not, right? Not too much of a difference. And of course, you have Jimmy G with some new weapons. So what really I think needs to go right offensively for the Raiders is that offensive line has to protect Jimmy G, and he has to be able to get on board and on page with his weapons, with Jacoby Myers, with Hunter Renfrow, obviously Devontae Adams. He's got to be able to get onto the same page with those guys quick and start to execute the game plan that Josh McDaniels rolls out there, and now Josh McDaniels has his guys. It's no longer the Derek Carr show. So that's the guy he inherited, right? There's other guys that were on the team that he inherited. These are his guys. So these are guys that are supposed to be able to go out there and execute his game plan, knowing what he wants them to do, what he wants it to look like. They're supposed to do that at a high level. So I want to see what that looks like. And again, the offensive line, as far as protecting, Jimmy G, they've got to do that, but they've also got to open up those holes for Josh Jacobs, right? And I think that Josh, there's got to be a healthy dose of Josh. I think that you're going to see some Zamir White, the second year back out of Georgia. I think you're going to see some of him just if for no reason other, just to give Josh a blow here and there, just to, get his legs back under him, because it is the first action that he's seen all training camp and all, no preseason or all. So I think that everything's got to really click for this offense. And I think it can, right? I mean, there's so many weapons on this team that if everything goes right, I believe it could be a really good offense, but it's asking a lot to come out of the gates, clicking on all cylinders. There's going to be a few hiccups here and there, but it looks to me like they have a lot of talent on paper. They have more talent on paper than they did last year offensively. So if things go right, I feel like they can have a good day at the office, even though the Broncos do have a really good defense. But again, everything's got to go right.
Right, and that's the case for the Broncos as well. I mean, we saw last year it felt like everything had to go right just for them to score more than 20 points. Now, not to be, overly critical of the team, it was just bad, Q. And we saw that, you saw that a couple of times, like scoring 16 points was pretty commonplace for this team. In fact, I think they barely averaged more than that. So, what has to go right for the Broncos to win? Well, first of all, they can't beat themselves. They were the league leaders in penalties last year. And it was a lot of this was pre-snap stuff that was setting them back, in their own territory anyway. So they're already starting with poor field position, then having to back up. Broncos consistently putting themselves in bad situations, or, finally getting down into the red zone. Then all of a sudden you have a big play and it's a holding by a wide receiver or something like that. So I want to see how much Sean Payton has been able to clean some of that stuff up, because he has a zero tolerance policy for it. Not to say that penalties and things won't happen, but that's just something that I know he's been really harping on a lot over the course of the last few months here. So the Broncos can't beat themselves if they're going to win this game. They've got to, it's so rudimentary, but they've got to find a way to score points. And I'm fascinated to see how that's going to happen. We need Russell Wilson to step up. Yes, but Javonte Williams also coming back from the major knee injury. How does he look? Samaje Perine coming in from the Bengals. How much action is he going to get? Because we know he signed in Denver because they promised him additional touches than what he had in Cincinnati. No Jerry Jeudy potentially for this game. I guess his situation is still murky, but what does that mean for Cortland Sutton? Is he going to be getting a heavy dosage? So who is going to step up offensively for the Broncos? Like you said, with Jacobs offensively for the Raiders, what are you getting from him? I think the Broncos have similar questions. Like, what are you getting from your top guys? Because we've either seen the worst or haven't seen the best of these guys for a really long time here. So, and then it's really just comes down to, I think, which offensive line can win against these pass rushers. The Broncos have a lot of guys out there and they've spent a lot of money. Randy Gregory, Zach Allen, DJ Jones, they've invested in the draft. Can those pass rushers put the heat on Jimmy G, right? And so I think that's going to be fascinating to see whether or not these two teams, like which team is going to come out looking cleaner. Like you said, it's going to be tough to expect these guys to just come out of the gates looking awesome. But I think at the same time, it's who's going to be the one that does look better and who looks more prepared coming out. It's going to be a great matchup. Do you have any additional thoughts on this game from the Raiders side of things?
Yeah, I think that, the defense, like I said, is going to be a big test for them. You mentioned, some of the guys that could be in or could be out potentially for the Broncos. And regardless who's playing or not, right, the Raiders have to go. And similar to what you said about the Broncos not beating themselves, the Raiders have been notorious for that, whether it's a late, penalty, a hit on the quarterback, a false start, a offsides, whatever the case may be, right? I mean, they've done too many things to inflict those self-inflicted wounds. You can't do that, right? You've got to be sound and disciplined, and you've got to be able to get after the quarterback and get after the ball, right? I mean, you've got to go get the ball. And again, I know I sound like a broken record, but literally all offseason, all training camp, that's all we've heard is you've got to go get the ball. We've got to go find a way to go create turnovers. The Raiders had 13 turnovers last season. That's all they created was 13. That's never going to get it done. 6 interceptions as a unit, right? There's guys that have more than 6 interceptions in a season, and the team had 6 interceptions as a whole defense. So that can't happen. So I want to see if they can start that, this week against Denver. One of the goals that I put on my board, right? I said should be one of the focuses for the Raiders this year is 40 sacks and 20 interceptions. And, when you look at the team that only had 26 sacks or 27 sacks last season and like I said, 6 interceptions and 13 turnovers, that sounds like a lot. But I don't think it should be a lot. I think it should be, basically the standard. Like, hey, this is probably the minimum of what you should be doing, at least be aiming for. So I want to see if they can get that started on Sunday. And if the defense could be this better defense that everyone's expecting with the additions of Marcus Epps, Marcus Peters, Robert Spillane, Tyree Wilson, the Jacorian Bennett, guys that they brought in. Again, no big sexy names, but guys that fit with what they want to do. Can they be that much better? And so, again, it all gets started on Sunday. They've talked the talk. It sounds great, right? It looked good in preseason and training camp. Can it translate into the regular season? Now, I feel like it can. I really do. And honestly, I'll tell you this straight up. Like, I look at this game, and I've been saying all week and the last couple of weeks that I feel like this is a game that the Raiders should win on paper. I feel like that they're the better team right now. And I'm not saying that that's what it's going to be week 18. I think Sean Payton's going to do some really good things with Denver Broncos. I just kind of feel like I said earlier in the show, it's going to take a while to get this team where he wants it to be. So I think that the Raiders getting them out of the gate is really an advantage for the Raiders, especially since they have continuity with the head coach. This is the first time Sean Payton's taken the field as the head coach for the Broncos. So I think it's going to, be a little bit of growing pains. Now, again, the Raiders have to do their part. I feel like on paper, the Raiders are the better team and should get the win, but you don't win games on paper in the NFL, as you very well know.
That's right. And optimism, I suppose, can still stay brimming here for the next couple days as both of these teams remain undefeated for at least a couple more days. So keeping the hope alive for each fan base. But I'm with you, Q. It's going to be, the proof will be in the pudding, right? I think it's the jury's out until we see on the field. You feel like both of these teams made improvements enough on paper to be able to win this game. And so I think Broncos country, very, trepidatious, I suppose, with their expectations right now, very much so in limbo and waiting to see. I'm sure many in Raiders Nation feeling the same way, but both teams just excited for this Band-Aid to be ripped off and these two teams to finally go out there and play. So a huge shout out to every single one of you that makes Locked On Broncos, Locked On Raiders your first listen of the day every single day. Again, subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts to get the latest episodes as soon as they're available. We can't wait for week 1, and we know that you're excited as well. Shout out to all of you who listen or watch. We'll talk to you in the next episode. See you soon.
So there you go, Raider Nation. There it is. That was the crossover edition, the very single first one of the 2023 season. Of course, we'll have at least 17 of those. I know that some people, that's their favorite show, and definitely appreciate that. I always like talking with different hosts that, really think about it from, both sides of the thing, and don't just go and say, oh, this team stinks or this team's not this, that, and the other. Kind of come at a respectable way. And Sarah does a good job of that. Cody does a good job of that. So I could definitely appreciate those guys from the Locked On Broncos show, and hopefully you do as well. So there you go. Coming up tomorrow on the Locked On Raiders podcast, as I'm still here in Bristol, Connecticut, what I'll do is I'll talk about keys to victory. We'll get back to more calls and text throughout that Locked On Raider podcast voicemail line, and more news and notes, and maybe there'll be a resolution of what's going on with this Chandler Jones situation. We'll continue to monitor it, and we'll continue to bring it here and document it here on the Locked On Raiders podcast. Until tomorrow, Raider Nation, take care of yourself, take care of your family, love on your family. Most importantly, as always, just win, baby.